Welcome to Screen Sleuths. I'm Chris, and with me as usual is Rob, and we are diving into Sugar, Episode 4, Starry Eyed. As we hit the halfway mark of the season, we are seeing that nobody is who they seem to be. So let's start off with the obvious question. Is Olivia in the locked room in Stallings' hideout?
Chris, I think we have to go with yes on this question. A lot of the clues were given just in these short pan shots and what we're kind of seeing on both sides of the room with the henchmen pulling out what is very obviously Olivia's cross necklace. To the point, the editing and some of the way the camera's panning towards the door. I think it's just very obvious. It's insinuating that that's definitely Olivia is the project he's talking about behind the door.
So if it is Olivia in Stallings' hideout, what does that mean for the relationship between him and Ruby that we know exists from Episode 3?
I'm going to start by saying I don't think the relationship is with Ruby is what led him to having Olivia there. But my big takeaway is obviously there is a reason that Ruby wants him to be allowed to continue working. I'm thinking it's because they hire him a little bit, kind of like a hired gun. Maybe not necessarily a hitman. That might be a little darker than the initial thought, but they use him as an asset because they know he's willing to get his hands dirty.
So you think that in episode 1 or 2, how Davy and Kenny talk about this secret organization of spies that went off to do something good or bad, or maybe subjectively good, that they're using Stallings as the more nefarious arm of the organization.
Right, getting his hands dirty when they don't want to, even though they think it's or deem that it's for the greater good and needs to be done. And aside from Ruby, we see that Stallings also has a pretty deep relationship with the Seagulls. Chris, fill us in a little more on that.
Yeah, that becomes pretty apparent after he gets that phone call from Stallings in the car right after the story drops that they have a prior relationship. Whether that's about Olivia or whether that's about just him helping cover up other sexual abuse stuff or whatever it might be, but there's definitely a relationship between at least some of the Seagulls and Stallings prior to this phone call.
Right, do you think so obviously, like you said, Davy, very obvious he's one of the ones that he's connected with. Who is there? Are there any other particular Seagulls, or I'll even because I know we've talked about it offline a little bit, Seagull adjacent family members that you think Stallings
Yeah.
might be more involved with?
So I mean, so here's how I kind of see it to be. Bernie is being made out to be the head Seagull outside of Jonathan. Jonathan's on his own little thing, but within the family
Sure.
that we see, Bernie's supposed to be the head of the snake. But I don't think that's the case. After watching the episode, after Davy and Kenny leave Helen's house, who is obviously not John's real mom, but supposedly
Yeah.
John's mom, after they leave, Davy, like a good boy, calls his mom and tells him how great he is and, whatever. But she plays defense. She wants to make sure that she's directing the story how she wants and that, don't talk to your dad right now. And I think that really it's Margit. That's how you say her name, Margit. I think it's because it's spelled a little different.
Yes. That was my guess too, Margit.
Yeah,
I think that's how I
that
said it.
Margit's probably the head of the snake and not so much Bernie. I don't think Bernie is as complicit in the kidnapping of Olivia as we would think he is in the beginning. I think that his ex-wife, that Davy's real mom, is probably more complicit because earlier in the episode, or maybe in a prior episode, they all kind of blend together now. Bernie and Margit are having a conversation about how great of a performance it was, and he's like, "Yeah, we have a problem. I'll just take care of it. Just who is it? Boom, 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 boom." She seems to be the more aggressive one in the group. She has this vision of Davy going from the best supporting actor to the best actor, and she has this starry-eyed version of what this is going to look like, and I think she'll do anything to get there. So I think that more than likely, Davy is working. I don't want to say for his mom, but you know what I'm saying. Like they're working in
Yeah,
conjunction.
I think the really good way to put it that we're kind of leaning in towards now is that Margit's the one that's hiring Stallings. That's where this kind of crossing of paths comes in. That she got Stallings involved to take care of her son's problems. Bernie, we're thinking, doesn't even know about Stallings. A big clue to that would be the apartment checks, because Davy, when he shows up, when John's looking around Olivia's apartment, is saying, my dad sends me every day. And he's like, oh, you just walk in without knocking? It's pretty cut and dry if you look back on it now to us that Bernie doesn't know she's for sure, kidnapped and locked up somewhere. To him, there's still a chance she's there. Whether he's happy about it or not, neither here nor there. But there's still a chance she's just in her apartment. But Davy knows for a fact she won't be there. And I think that's a good indication of the level of knowledge they have around Olivia.
So, based on the fact that we think Bernie is probably only complicit for the sexual assault information and not for Olivia's kidnapping, which is most likely spearheaded by Davy and Margit, then what is the relationship we're seeing between Melanie and Bernie? Because it looks like they had in episode 3 a night together at the beach house, which he comes home late from in episode 4, but then a falling out at the screening we see on the security cameras.
Yeah, this one kind of changed my opinion a little bit. I think at the end of episode 3, when we see Melanie go over, our assumption was that they still had a positive relationship. Let's put it that way. The two of them were still seeing each other in some way, shape, or form. But I've shifted my opinion to where we had mentioned the possibility of her using him for information because she figured he would be the best source. Now, I do believe that's what they were doing, is she went over to try and get information from him. But after spending time with John trying to track down the friend that she had seen at the lunch table, and she finds out the information about Davy for the first time, it seems to be the first time. Let's put it out that way too. Seems to be finding out this information about Davy and the blackmail. I am operating under the assumption that the chain of events is she then confronts Bernie and says she needs to speak, and kind of sets up a similar meeting the same way John was trying to do with Jonathan Seigel, where they meet at the screening, and that's why they go upstairs to talk alone. She confronts him with the information about Davy, where Bernie tries to shut it down. That's where we see him. He puts his hand on the wall, tries to kind of corner her and saying, "Don't do this, you can't do this," whatever that conversation may exactly have been. Melanie then flees from the screening at that point, right? We see her leave pretty quickly, which would make total sense then that she would have been the one to be able to feed the story to the outlets about Davy. And that was why the timing would have been about then. And now that we feel we have a better understanding for Bernie Seigel, Chris, how do you think we feel about Jonathan Seigel as a person now as well?
I think that we're going to find out that Jonathan Seigel is a big part of the rot in the Seigel family that John mentions and is not the benevolent, worried grandfather that we meet in episode 1. After finding out that the dress worn by Lorraine Everly, Jonathan's wife and Bernie's mother, is the same dress Rachel, Olivia's mother, is wearing in those risque photos that we see, it's clear that Jonathan Seigel took the photos and was probably having a sexual relationship with Rachel. And to go a step further, I think Jonathan is Olivia's father and not her grandfather. And to me, if we view the relationships between Jonathan and Olivia and Bernie and Olivia through that lens, they make more sense. Not to mention the Jonathan and Bernie dialogue that we get at the screening. And if we take that theory and that view of Jonathan Seigel, I think we can also say that he may have been the cause of Rachel's death, and it wasn't just a car accident, it was murder. Because remember, we get another glimpse of how when the Seigels are involved in a crime, it just evaporates. When John and Melanie are talking to Olivia's friend about the story of Davy and their revenge porn, and that it went nowhere once the police knew a Seigel was involved. There's actually another callback in this episode that I think shows the duality of Jonathan Seigel's character that Rob pointed out.
Yeah, and not to sell Chris short, we actually both had the same idea about this, which I thought was pretty crazy. The scene, one of the scenes they use early in this episode, the way they've been cutting in some of these older movies, was John Carpenter's The Thing, which they talk about extensively, even within the show, where John Sugar is talking to Dr. Vickers about the episode, the scene with the defibrillator in The Thing. Now, if you're not familiar, not to play a huge spoiler here, it's not really much of a spoiler for the movie that you should definitely watch. But The Thing is a creature alien up in Antarctica at a research facility that can take the form of these humans or other living things. So it's this metaphor for not being the same on the inside and outside, and what you're seeing on the outside isn't really who they are. So the kind of mirrored imagery of the defibrillator scene from The Thing to Jonathan Seigel having his heart attack and them using the defibrillator on him seems pretty spot on for us, that it's just us now getting the definitive confirmation that he's not who he was trying to put on the face of. And I say that, I think this is a really good piece to look at, that even if Chris's theory might be a little bit out there for you, even though I do actually tend to believe him now here that the lineage of the Seigel family might run that way, I don't think there's any arguing with the fact that this was a true full-on metaphor and analogy for Jonathan Seigel's not who he said he was.
Okay, Rob, I have one more question for you. Do you think that the show's twist is going to be angels, aliens, vampires, werewolves, AI, whatever? Do we think that any of those prevailing theories that are obviously floating around out there are true, or do you think it's something else? Personally, I think it's more of a grounded sci-fi in the lane of physiological upgrades, whether it's an implant or a serum, possibly some memory alterations or implants. But since the show is described as a noir with a sci-fi twist, for me that cancels out some of the more fantasy genre-based theories and leaves pretty much aliens, which I'm just not convinced of.
Yeah, Chris, totally agree. As much as I love werewolves and vampires and all that kind of the genre, I don't think that's what we're seeing here. The grounded piece is what I totally agree with. And for those who want to know what I'm talking about, I actually have a very specific theory that's going to show what I mean by grounded science fiction. What I think the science fiction twist that they mention in the show's description is that the group that John is a part of is that they are getting an intravenous drug that Vickers refers to that they've created to heighten their senses. So, obviously, sight, sound, taste, touch, all those things, because of their goal of observation and being able to watch people. Could there be some effects there too where John has heightened, reflexes, things like that? Potentially. So, I think that's what the science fiction twist we're going to see is that they've created this drug, and then additionally would give us a possible reasoning for his twitching and things like that, where it's an adverse effect of the drug. If he's not using it as much as he's supposed to be, maybe it's causing his hand to twitch and lose a little bit of his focus and things like that. So I do think we are going to see the twist. Obviously, we know from the jump it's going to happen, but to Chris's point, a much more grounded one than something quite as supernatural.
Yeah, after hearing that, I think we're pretty much in the same lane on where we think this might go and what the twist might be. With that said, we really want to hear what you all think. If you have a different theory, if you think it's supernatural, aliens, AI, time travel, let us know. Rob, tell these people where they can tell us what they think.
Obviously, drop a comment under this YouTube video. Also, while you're at it, please like and subscribe. Let the algorithm know we're on the right track. But you can also find us on Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere you could even think of. So if you have questions, more thoughts on the theories, let us know.
Okay, with that said, we are excited to see where the second half of this season takes us, and we look forward to discussing episode 5 with you all next week.